There's an age-old debate in the scouting community, production versus potential. Would you rather draft a player who played at a high level in college or who has elite physical attributes? Missouri tackle Armand Membou has both. He could be the Jets' pick at 7, but he's still kind of a work in progress. How can this be? I'll explain today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today our episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, today we're going to talk about Missouri offensive tackle Armand Membou, who is a prospect that's generating a lot of buzz for the New York Jets with the 7th overall pick. We're going to talk about where Membou could fit on the roster, what his role could be as a rookie if the Jets select him. We'll talk about some of the question marks in his game as well, but we're going to begin talking about why he's on the table for the New York Jets with the 7th overall pick. We are gliding through the offseason. We are now getting close to the NFL draft, and the deeper we've gotten into this offseason, the more buzz Membou has gotten. And I think that there are reasons for this. You know, when you talk about drafting in the top 10, there's frequently a debate about what's more important. Is production more important or is potential more important? And this really comes down to a question: would you rather have a prospect who played at a really high level in college, or would you rather have somebody with physical tools that project to the NFL? And I think it's fair to say Armand Membou has both of them. He was a second-team All-SEC performer this past year. So he played in the best conference in college football at a high level and was one of the top performers there. But he also is a guy with immense physical tools. He is a guy who ran a sub-5 40-yard dash. And you may doubt the idea that the 40-yard dash is important for offensive linemen because how many times does an offensive lineman run 40 yards down the field? Not that often. Like so, it's on a breakaway rushing play or something like that. And, he's usually not throwing the key blocks when he does that. But there is some evidence that, whether it's just showing raw athleticism, whether it's showing, your ability to move, that the 40-yard dash does have some correlation to success in the NFL. Now, what else would I say that's good about Armand Membou? Well, not only did he play at a high level in college, but he did it at a young age. I mean, he just turned 21, so he was playing really well as a 20-year-old, and he was a multi-year starter. So he cracked the starting lineup at Missouri at age 19, and actually had a little bit. He even got a little bit of playing time at age 18. Age matters for prospects. It doesn't matter. I think sometimes people say, "Well, why do you care what age a prospect is? Even if he's 25, fine. That means you get 7 years out of him instead of 10." From that standpoint, age is not that important, but age is a good test to try and contextualize what your quality of play means. What does that mean? Well, a 20-year-old who's going up against 21, 22-year-olds and holding his own, that's more impressive than a guy, 22-year-old, going up against guys the same age. Because Membou, because he's so young, still has time to grow. There's still a longer runway for him to improve. He's further away from his physical prime than somebody who's 22. That means that there's more theoretical upside there. And, you look at his production in the SEC. I mean, he did not allow a sack in 2024. Now, does that mean he's going to step into the NFL and be a finished product? No, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But what allowing 0 sacks at age 20 tells me is that there is a lot of physical ability here. Because in college football, you can dominate based on physical ability alone. You can't in the NFL. Again, we're going to get to this in a little bit. In the NFL, you got to have good technique. But in college football, the gap between teams can be very, very large. The gap between one player versus another can be very, very large. Not so in the NFL. The NFL, even the bad players were all conference guys. But in college, you could physically dominate somebody. And the fact that Membou was doing this at age 20 in the best conference in America and maybe you could argue the Big Ten was better this past year, but one of the top 2 conferences in America, it shows you that, like he was just an absolutely dominant prospect. I think that if you look at him, he's got the prototypical size that you want. He has all the attributes you'd look for in a tackle. And, I think we get a little carried away by with the measurements at a lot of positions. I mean, is it really the end of the world if a wide receiver is a little undersized? The answer is no, because the wide receiver position, there are lots of ways you could be good. There are lots of different styles to play the wide receiver position and still be effective. Is it really a big deal if you're a running back who's a little undersized? No, we've seen plenty of smaller backs who have had success in the league. The quarterback position, I mean, how many times do you hear this guy's too short to play quarterback? And look how many undersized, smaller quarterbacks have been effective in the NFL. So I think there are certain positions where we become prisoners to the tape. I'm not talking about the film. I'm talking about the tail of the tape, the tape that measures you. At the tackle position, your size actually matters a lot because you're in the trenches. It's a physical position. It is you're in the most physical spot. You're where the battles are happening on a play-to-play basis. You cannot be manhandled. And Membou, guy who's at 320 pounds, guy who has 33.5-inch arms. So those aren't super long arms, but generally speaking, the view is that in the NFL, you want your tackles to have at least 33-inch arms because when you are playing the tackle position, you have to maintain balance, but you also want to be able to strike the first punch. If you're off balance, it's very easy for NFL caliber defenders to throw, just kind of get leverage on you and throw you aside. So you have to maintain a good center of balance against NFL caliber defenders, but you also want to be able to strike first. And that's what those long arms do. And Membou has, they aren't super long. Again, the threshold, generally speaking, is viewed as 33 inches. He's at 33.5. So perfectly, that certainly his arms are long enough for him to play the tackle position effectively in the NFL. Another thing I'd say is he's shown mobility, and that kind of reflects in his athletic performance at the combine, where he did a very good job. He looks athletic enough to play the tackle position. It shows up on the film. It showed up at the combine. Playing the tackle positions, athleticism is critical at the tackle position in a way it's not at the guard position. And why is that? Well, when you're playing guard, there's a guy on either side of you. You're kind of in a phone booth, so you don't really need to kick out very far, because if a guy goes to your left, well, he's going running into the center. Guy goes to your right, he's running into the tackle. So you can pass guys off. At the tackle position, there's only the edge there. Sometimes the tight end lines up to you. Maybe he'll give you a little help with a chip, but generally speaking, the edge is yours. And you're going up against some of the most explosive athletes in the world who are rushing from the edge spot. You got to be able to get out far. And Membou in Missouri, he was asked to do vertical sets. A vertical set means you back up at the snap. And why do you do that in a pass play? Well, because it gives you a better angle from a guy rushing off the edge. But it puts you at a disadvantage because you have this world-class athlete who has all the momentum in the world firing up field at you, and you're kind of giving way. Your momentum's working against you. So it requires a lot of skill to be able to hold up in that situation. The great tackle Joe Thomas from the Cleveland Browns, he was the best at the vertical pass sets. Membou has experience of that in college. He did that quite a bit. That's not that common in today's college game to have experience doing vertical pass sets. And again, he didn't allow a sack this past year in college, so that's a good thing. The other thing the other thing I saw out of him that displayed his mobility, Missouri ran a lot of zone blocking plays. What's zone blocking? Well, there's essentially two types of run plays in football. There's man blocking and zone blocking. And at their most basic element, man blocking means you have a specific man you're blocking. Zone blocking means you're blocking a specific area. But another element of zone blocking is that everybody is moving laterally. The entire line is either moving laterally left or right at the snap. And the reason for that is, you may be going up against a 330-pound nose tackle. It's tough to drive him forward. But if you get everybody moving in one direction, sometimes the tackle will run himself out of the play. Sometimes he'll over pursue, and then all you have to do is throw a block at a good angle. The running back's got a cutback lane, and you go through it. Membou looked good at running those zone concepts as a blocker at the tackle position. So you could see why the Jets could be interested in him with the 7th overall pick. So what's missing here? I mean, great production, world-class physical ability. I had you on the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll talk about some of the things Armand Membou's got to work on, because believe it or not, despite his success in college and despite everything I just said about his physical attributes, he's not a finished product. And there are some question marks. We'll get to them as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, shopping online, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner will be smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're talking about a player the Jets could draft 7th overall. It is tackle Armand Membou out of Missouri, a guy who, through the whole process, since the start of the offseason, has been rising up draft boards. And there have been really like two guys who I've heard a lot of buzz about over the last couple of weeks with the New York Jets. One is Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. The other is Armand Membou, the tackle out of Missouri. Now, you look at Membou's resume, no sacks allowed, second team all conference. And you look at how well he did in the combine. Again, he's got production. He's got potential. So this is the perfect prospect, right? Well, look, there's no perfect prospect. And I think that there are a lot of things Membou has to clean up. I think that he's a guy who really relied on his natural ability in college in a way that, he's not going to be able to in the NFL. I think in the NFL, there are things he's going to have to clean up technically. And that's not to say, he's a bad prospect. That's not to say he should be off the table for the Jets at 7th overall, because quite frankly, there's really no except for maybe the first overall pick in a given year. There's no prospect who enters the NFL who's completely ready, who has nothing to work on. I mean, look, these guys are young. They're still learning how to play the game. So nothing I say here should be construed as, over the top negative on Membou. And I do know that sometimes you can nitpick the technical stuff, but I think at the tackle position, it's more important at the tackle position than it is at other spots. Even quarterback, I feel like people pour over quarterbacks throwing motions with a fine-tooth comb. And look, if you can throw the ball, get it to the spot effectively, what do I care what your throwing motion is? There are lots of unconventional throwing motions who have worked at the quarterback position. It's much tougher to do that at the tackle position, because at tackle, you're going against world-class athletes who are edge rushers and guys who understand how to use technique. And look, when you're as big and as physical and as athletic as Membou is in college, you can get by without great technique, because you can just overwhelm your opponent physically. It's much, much tougher to do in the National Football League. And it's even impossible to do in the National Football League. At the tackle position, you've got to be really athletic, but you also have to be really technical. And I mean, there are things that I noticed from Membou. There are moments both as a pass blocker and as a run blocker where, he's kind of a leaner, where he kind of gets himself off balance. You don't want to get yourself off balance in the National Football League as a tackle, because a great defensive end, or even an average defensive end who understands technique, if you get off balance, you lose your center of gravity, they'll just throw you aside. They'll toss you aside. That doesn't happen in college. And that's one of the questions, I always get when I say something like this is, well, if it was such a big deal, why was he able to dominate in college? Well, because he's going up against guys who aren't as good. The NFL, everyone's good. In the NFL, everybody is athletic. Everybody's big. You're facing against even practice squad players tended to be at the top of their team. They tend to be the best player on their team in college. So in the NFL, you've got to be physically talented, but you also have to be technically sound. And with those 33.5-inch arms, I think that was one of the big question marks for Membou, and why the tail of the tape was important for him. Because, you see, sometimes he leans. He doesn't have to lean. When you have 33.5-inch arms, you don't have to lean. So that's, something that will need to be cleaned up. Another thing is, I think that you see him struggle sometimes with putting his hands in the right place, and also the timing with which he hits the opponent. Sometimes he's a little slow to hit his opponent. And again, you want to strike the first punch. You want to be the one that throws your opponent off balance. You don't want your opponent to strike the first punch against you, because that's how you get thrown off balance. You got to hit him in the right place to disrupt him. I think sometimes, again, for that first punch can be misplaced. And again, that's not a big deal when you just got like some guy in college who's not that good who you can just throw around without hitting him in the right spot. The NFL, there's a smaller strike zone that you have to hit. One other thing I noticed about him is that when he struggled, I did notice he tended to struggle against like some of the more athletic, twitchier edge rushers. And I remember who's got really good physical attributes. Again, I mean, he was a star at the combine. If you watch him on the film, he kind of pops with his movement skills. But, maybe it's just like his instincts are still developing. There's something there, but like sometimes like the quicker guys can kind of sneak up on him. And one final thing that concerns me a little bit about him, I'm not sure whether it's just a technical thing or whether it's something deeper, but you ever hear like the expression about an offensive lineman that he has a nasty streak? And that means essentially like, even though he's blocked a guy, he's still driving him 5 yards down the field, even though the ball's like well past everybody. He just loves blocking, he loves hitting, he loves driving guys forward. I don't see a lot of that in Membou. I see it flash. So I think the question becomes, is that just something he lacks, or does this go back to technique where because, maybe he's not using the best technique, he can't completely, annihilate guys. And, that could be something that comes with time. So, none of this is to say that he's off the table when the Jets draft at 7, but I think that this is very much the type of pick that the offensive line coach has to be on board with. And this is, all offseason, I've referred to certain moves as like a referendum on the front office or a referendum on the coaching staff, because essentially what you're doing is what the Jets have done with a number of players is they've taken guys and they're essentially more or less saying, based on the contract they're getting, based on the role they're going to play, the Jets have said, we can get more out of this guy than his previous team did. Now, when we're talking about Armand Membou, what you really would say is you're counting on your offensive line coach to be able to coach this guy up because the physical ability is all there with him. Like his biggest critic would have a tough time arguing that he lacks the physical attributes to play the tackle position. And that's important. I don't think that like physical attributes are really what make or break a player, but I think there's a certain threshold you have to hit. And that's true at every single position. You want to talk safety, you want to talk linebacker, wide receiver, you name it. The NFL, look, there is a certain physical threat, whether it's speed, whether it's size. There are certain criteria you have to hit. If you can't hit these criteria, you're not going to be able to play effectively in the league. Once you hit that criteria, it's all about your ability to develop, to learn technique, to understand the finer points of your craft. I think it's fair to say right now, as pretty much any 21-year-old would be. I mean, look, Fashanu last year, who was so we're talking about draft prospects. Fashanu was one of the more polished prospects in recent memory. He still wasn't ready to play day one. He still needed about half a season on the bench to kind of fine tune his technique. So when I say this, that doesn't mean Armand Membou, has no opportunity to learn, because he brings a lot of positives to the table. I mean, he's displayed at a young age an ability to play at a very high level, but there are some of the finer things that he needs to be taught. And the question is, how quickly can he get up to speed? So your offensive line coach needs to tell you, we can get him up to speed really fast, because sometimes there are guys who are drafted in this league who, especially more and more on the offensive line, who enter the league with great physical ability and without the technical refinement. And their first contract, they struggle, and it takes them a couple of years. And it's not till their second contract that they really hit their stride with their second team. So you want to make sure the guy you're drafting is not going to be like that. You want to make sure the guy you draft will be able to get up to speed immediately. And that's ultimately going to be the question if the Jets pick Membou at 7. And it's really going to be, I think that's a referendum pick. It's not a referendum on the front. Every first round pick's a referendum on the front office, but it's especially a referendum on the coaching staff. What could the coaching staff do with Armand Membou if he is drafted? Ahead, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. Let's project Membou's year one role. I think he's probably in the starting lineup. I don't think it's a guarantee. I also don't think it's an open camp competition. Let's reconcile those thoughts as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You will love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for your chance to win big. Very exciting NBA playoffs shaping up. Really, I don't know who's going to win it all this year. Well, if you know who's going to win it all, again, FanDuel's the place to get in on the action. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Again, it's FanDuel.com, so you can claim your $250 in bonus bets today. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. We are focused on a draft prospect today. It is Armand Membou, a tackle out of Missouri. He's been generating a lot of buzz with the New York Jets owning the 7th overall pick. He very well could be the player the Jets select once they are on the clock. So let's say the Jets pick Membou. What could we expect from him as a rookie? Now, I don't think it would be a 100% lock that he would be the opening day starting tackle, but I think the odds would be in his favor because when you pick somebody 7th overall, you don't want him to sit on the bench for very long. You only get one first-round pick a year, and you usually want it to be an impact player. And the higher you pick, the higher the expectations are. The Jets did sign Chukwuma Okorafor this offseason from New England. He only played 12 snaps with the Patriots last year before he left the team. Prior to that, Okorafor was with the Steelers. He has fairly extensive starting experience, but his play of late has not been very good. Last 2 years, he's been benched, and even prior to that, he was more just a guy who was, you could live with it at tackle. He was never a guy who was a great tackle. I think what would happen is there would be some sort of competition, but it would not be what I would consider an open camp competition. So sometimes you have two guys you think are roughly equal. So you have an open camp competition, and what that means is like you two guys compete. Whoever plays better gets the starting job. Whoever outperforms the other in camp practices and in the preseason, you're out there week one. I don't think that's what it would be with Membou. I think what it would be a competition slanted in Membou's direction. And it would be less that Okorafor could do anything to win it and more that Membou could play himself out of the role. If he just looked like he was totally not ready, if you just like we can't put this guy on the field, that's when Okorafor could earn a starting job. Because really the Jets, Okorafor's fine as a backup, but I don't think he would. I think he would be really exposed if he was the opening day starter at tackle. So you'd really like to avoid that. And I think as much as anything, Membou would be the guy the Jets would hope would complete their offensive line. Jets entered this offseason with really 4 of their 5 offensive line spots settled. You had Fashanu at left tackle, John Simpson at left guard, Joe Tippmann at center, Elijah Vera Tucker at right guard. The real question mark was the right tackle position. And the Jets lost their starting right tackle, Morgan Moses, in free agency to New England. And tough to lose Moses, professional guy. He played well with the Jets in 2 stints, great locker room guy, really tough, plays through injuries, but also a guy at 34 it was probably not a great move by the Patriots to give him really multiple years of guarantees because his play had already kind of been declining. I mean, when a guy's on the downslide and he's in his mid-30s, bad things happen when you give multiple guaranteed years. So Jets probably made the right move letting Morgan Moses go, but it did leave a hole at the right tackle spot. I think the Jets would hope Membou would solve it in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, he would hope that he would be able to develop enough quickly to be able to start at the right tackle spot is right away. And longer term, I mean, it could set the Jets offensive line up because in that situation, Jets would have 5 offensive linemen, and the only one who would be on the older side would be John Simpson. I mean, 3 of the 5 offensive linemen would be guys who have been drafted in the last 2 years because Joe Tippmann was a second-round pick in 2023, and Fashanu was a first-round pick last year. So you'd have 3 of your 5 offensive linemen in year 3 or younger. And Elijah Vera Tucker is, only in year 5. So he's not young, but he's like entering his prime where you feel like he should have a lot of good years in front of him. And beyond that, this would be an offensive line with a tremendous pedigree. There are lots of different ways to build good offensive lines, and this is not the only way to build one, but look, the last time the Jets had a dominant offensive line, it was in the late Eric Mangini, early Rex Ryan days. And what did they have? They had 4 guys who had been drafted in the first round on the offensive line. They had Brickashaw Ferguson, they had Alan Faneca, they had Nick Mangold, and they had Damian Woody. Brandon Moore was the only guy who did not have a high draft pedigree, and Moore developed really well. Well, in a scenario where you draft Armand Membou, what do you have on the offensive line? You would have, of your 5 guys, 3 of them would be first-round picks, Fashanu, AVT, and Membou. And one would be a second-round pick in Joe Tippmann. John Simpson would be the only guy without a high draft pedigree. Now, of course, draft pedigree only means so much. Good players can be drafted later. Undrafted free agents can be good players. Guys who are drafted highly aren't always good players. But it shows you that these were guys who, when they entered the league, were viewed as very high upside players. And the offensive line is a really important spot. And, I don't want to be like the old man yelling at cloud right now, but I do feel like maybe like fantasy football has made people lose track of how critical the offensive line is. Football is still a game where it's important to be able to control the trenches. It's still a game of physicality. You want your offensive line to be able to impose its will on the opposition. And maybe because of, again, like I feel like I'm old man right now, but there's just like so much focus on the skill position. And look, rightly so. Skill positions are also very important, but you can't lose track of the trenches. You can't lose track of your ability to win up front. And an investment, there would probably be, I bet you there would be some criticism for the Jets drafting tackles in back-to-back years, but there is real value in having bookend tackles. Olu Fashanu looked good. Olu Fashanu may not be a sure thing in year 2, but he's a guy I feel very confident about because of the way he ended his first season. You can bookend him with another quality tackle, and this could be your tackle duo for the next 10 years. You have one of the most important spots figured out, and you don't have to worry about it. We always talk about this on this podcast. You're in every day, or you've heard me say it on many occasions, that the NFL draft, everybody always just talks about filling your biggest holes, but it's also about like building strengths. And it's about setting your positions up to not be holes for a long time. And if you can get 2 tackles back-to-back years who both hit, and you won't have to worry about addressing that for the next 8 years to a decade, you've really done something there. So Membou is not a slam dunk. He's a guy who comes with a fair share of question marks, and it's going to be really important for your have a good offensive line. Thank goodness Keith Carter's not here anymore. We're going to need a good offensive line coach to develop him, teach him the finer points, the fundamentals of hand placement, when to strike, not making sure he stays in his stance. But if you draft him, you could be really setting your offensive line up to be good for a long time. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and please send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will plan on doing a weekly mailbag, so can't wait to answer your questions.